Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali, for inviting me to do this presentation. And good morning to all of my friends in Saudi Arabia and in the region, or good afternoon, actually. I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules to spend some time with me today to talk about a topic that tends to be a challenge for companies around the world, independent of their industry, independent of their the region of the world in which they exist. And so what we wanted to talk about today was, how do we actually make performance management work better? And we're going to talk about that in a few different ways. We're going to discuss how to lay the right foundation for talent management. So what does it mean to start right? How do we apply the science in this area? There is tremendously good science to guide us and guide our choices in how we design and implement performance management. But perhaps most importantly, how do we make this incredibly easy for our clients, for our customers in the organization to actually use? So that's a quick preview. Brief introduction. I may know some of you on the phone. I might not know others, so I just wanted to give a very fast introduction to build on what Ali said. My name is Marc Effron. I'm the president of a small consulting firm called the Talent Strategy Group. And although we're small, most of our clients are the world's largest global corporations. That would be everything from a Philip Morris to a Pepsi to a Starbucks and others. And we spend a lot of our time helping those companies to radically simplify talent management practices. As Ali mentioned, our firm also does quite a bit of writing. We publish Talent Quarterly magazine, and I wrote the recent Harvard book, One Page Talent Management. We teach people how to become better at talent management through our Talent Management Institute at the University of North Carolina, and obviously do quite a bit of publishing work. But today is not about me. It is about you and how you can ensure that performance management is incredibly effective in your organization. And let's start this by discussing the fact that you really do have the power. You have this incredible power in your organizations to make performance management work, to really make things good, or perhaps to make things great, or if you do it really well, to make things incredibly good in your organization. You are the leaders or the human resource leaders in your organization, and you really do have more control over the effectiveness of this process than you might imagine. Now, you have the power to make things incredibly good. You also have the power, unfortunately, to make things really bad if you don't do performance management the right way. So our discussion this morning, or this afternoon, is going to be, how do we separate what we know makes performance management very effective from a lot of the fads that have become popular over the past few years. And we're going to discuss that in a few areas. As I talked about before, performance is a broad topic. We'll talk about what are the right foundations for performance management. What do you need to do first to make performance management work? We're going to talk about the science in the area. So what do we know is absolutely proven to be true by the conclusive academic science? And we're going to talk about how do we radically simplify this process so that it works really, really well. Let's start with foundations. There are a few things I'd love for you to keep in mind as you think about starting the process. The first one, and I'll use a term that one of my colleagues coined, called hyperclarity, meaning what exactly is the purpose of performance management in your organization. I find it amazing when I walk into a client initially after they've asked me to help them with performance management. The first question that myself or a team member will ask is, what are you trying to achieve with performance management? Now, that should be a relatively straightforward question, but I normally hear one of two responses. One is nervous laughter, because they're not really sure what they're trying to achieve, or absolute silence because they're not sure what they're trying to achieve. The starting point for performance management is, what is it? What's the business goal that you're trying to achieve? And that could be anything. It can be align people with goals. It could be motivate. It could be develop. There are lots of different things we can do with performance management, but where most organizations make an early mistake is in not figuring out what their one primary goal is. Because as you're all well aware, a process can't serve every single need. It can likely serve one need very well. So what's your goal? That's the right starting point. The second key foundation element to think about is, what's your philosophy that's going to guide how you implement talent performance management? Now, you might think, well, philosophy, that's a very soft word, but actually it's a very hard concept. So what do I mean by talent philosophy? Well, do you have in your company, at the senior team level, managing director, the CEO, whoever's in charge of your company, he and his team, have they agreed on things like how long it's okay to be an average performer, or how accountable managers are to develop their employees and what the consequences are if they don't, or how open and transparent should a manager be with their direct reports about their ability to move forward in the company? The answers to those types of questions, which I would call talent philosophy questions, are the foundation for effective performance management, because they're going to answer the question, what will our senior team support, and what does our senior team believe will allow us to achieve our business goals? Because if you haven't agreed on something like how long it's okay to be average, it's going to be difficult to have a good performance management conversation, because you're not going to know how to react to someone who is a good, solid 50th percentile performer. In some companies that might be fine. Other companies that might be completely unacceptable. The same thing around accountability. We all think that managers should be accountable for developing their teams, but accountability should mean consequences. So what are the consequences, both positive and negative, if a manager does or does not develop their team? So getting to answers on some of those fundamental questions is incredibly important. The challenge is, if you don't have that talent philosophy in place, you're likely to be making different decisions about people who are similarly positioned in the organization. So for example, if Ali is a high performer and Mark is an average performer, we should have different experiences in our organization. But if we leave it to every individual manager to implement their own personal talent philosophy, it might be that Ali and I each have very similar experiences in terms of the communication we receive about how we're doing, about the compensation that we receive, about the development investment that's made in us. So if you have that talent philosophy in place, if you have the executive team aligned around how everyone will manage people based on their performance and their potential, you have the foundation in place on which to build good talent management. So when I say talent philosophy, what do I mean by that? Well, talent philosophy is actually very simple. It's the answer to 5 questions. In the area of performance, how much does higher or lower performance matter? Or really, at what threshold do I care about your performance? How high does it have to be, or how low does it have to be before something happens to me in the organization? Same thing with behaviors. The question isn't, are behaviors important? Of course behaviors are important. But how good or how bad do my behaviors have to be before you, as my boss, care about that? Differentiation, a critical question. How do you want to allocate development and rewards based on an individual's performance and potential? How much more should a high performer get than an average performer? A high potential leader versus an average potential leader? Transparency, accountability. Transparency is a key challenge for organizations around the world. How open do you want to be with people about their ability to move forward in the organization? And how much do you want to hold managers accountable for someone's development? Now, you might be saying, well, Mark, I have lots of things to do in my company. Talent philosophy sounds like just one more thing I now have to do. How does this fit in with everything else that I do in my organization? I see talent philosophy as one of two foundation elements for performance management. So if you look at this little model, there are two things that are going to help build that strong foundation. One is you have some sort of success model, leadership model, competency model, something that defines here is what great looks like in our organization. And then your talent philosophy tells people the rules of the road for making decisions about talent. So if you have those two things in place, if you have that success model or leadership model, and if you have that talent philosophy, you now know what you're trying to build, that's the success model, and how you plan to build it. That's that talent philosophy. After that, you will then have plenty of guidance for building out things like performance management. Now, when we say talent philosophy, what does that mean? It is not a complicated multi-paragraph list. It's simply providing direction to people in each of those four areas. For example, if you look at the upper left-hand part of the screen where it says transparency, this is an actual client example from a large pharmaceutical company. We will be far more open about your future within the organization, what it takes to succeed and win here. Now, that might not sound very radical to you, or it might sound very radical. For this organization, it was a very big step forward. What's most important, though, is it gave clarity to managers about how they were supposed to interact with the people who worked for them. And that was that they would need to tell them about their performance and need to tell them about their potential. And employees were told this as well, so the employees could hold managers accountable for being more transparent. So that was just a little bit on foundation. The two things I want you to remember are hyper clarity. What's the one thing you're trying to achieve in performance management? I know you're going to say there are 10 things we're trying to achieve. I understand that. What's the one big goal that you really have for the process? And what are the rules of the road for managing talent at your organization? Because that's going to help provide you with a lot of guidance about how to structure performance management in the organization. So that's a little bit about foundations. Now let's move into the science. We are very fortunate that there have been a lot of very smart academics who have come before us who have answered a lot of the questions about how we can make performance management work in our organizations. And unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of a gap between what companies actually do and what we know is proven to work. So I thought this morning we could start with a little quiz about what we actually do know about what is scientifically proven to be true to help performance management. So you can keep track on a little sheet of paper, or if you're sitting in a group, you can compare your answers, but I'm curious your responses to these questions. So for the statements that are going to appear on the screen in just a moment, which of these are actually scientifically proven to be true? Let's start with employees achieve higher performance when they set their own performance goals. That's question number one. I'll come back to the answers. Second, if you give someone harder goals, they will work harder to accomplish those goals. Again, you need to answer, is that scientifically proven to be true, yes or no? Third, self-assessments of performance are more accurate than peer assessments, but less accurate than a manager's assessment, true or false? And greater career success comes from developing one's strengths rather than improving one's weaknesses. So I'm curious what your answers are to those questions. I'll tell you what the science would say about each of those. For that first question, employees achieve higher performance if they set their own performance goals. Actually, the science is very clear. Employees will perform at an equally high level whether their manager or they themselves set those performance goals. Now, I was raised to think that, employees set goals must be better goals, but the science is exceptionally clear in this area. If my manager sets a goal for me, or if I set a goal for myself, I'm going to perform at the same level. Second question, if you give someone harder goals, they will work harder to accomplish those goals. One of the best proven facts in science around performance management, absolutely yes. As human beings, we respond to challenges with effort, and so the more you challenge someone, the more effort they're going to put in, up to the point where they don't think it's actually worth their time to put any more effort in. Self-assessments. Self-assessments are the least possible or least accurate form of assessment. We are all wonderfully delusional about our own capabilities and our own behaviors, and unfortunately everyone is a better assessor of ourselves than we are. And finally, we get better if we focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses. Despite the fact that Gallup has sold 4 million books on this topic, there is no science to back this statement up. Actually, there is science that would suggest that successful leaders are typically held back because of their weaknesses, and that in most cases strengths will take care of themselves, and that it's those weaknesses that are going to limit our ability to move forward. So you might have gotten all those right, all those wrong. The point wasn't to catch you being right or wrong. It was to really reinforce that we oftentimes design performance management with some of the wrong facts. So if you had answers to that quiz that weren't right, you probably have designed in the past practices that would have been based on some incorrect assumptions. So starting with the science is an absolutely critical piece, and that means good academic science, not benchmarking and finding out what my neighbors are doing, or fads like rating list systems, or just trying to find an easy way out of the process that's not rigorous. So starting with the science, absolutely essential. And science does not mean what I would call fashion or fads. There's a lot of noise going around today about things like rating list processes. I'm not either in favor of or opposed to ratings. Ratings are a tool that serves a purpose. The question is, what's the purpose that you're trying to achieve? What's the goal of your process? If ratings would be helpful, then you add them in. If they're not helpful, then you take them out. Rating list processes have become popular because people say, or managers say, my employees don't like being rated, therefore we should eliminate them. Well, employees don't like a lot of things. That doesn't mean we eliminate everything that might cause someone to be somewhat unhappy. Ratings are a key way to differentiate individuals, and I can guarantee you that high performers certainly want to know how they're rated. There are also some, what I would consider to be slightly silly ideas out there, like crowdsourcing ratings, meaning I'm going to ask anyone who might have had any interaction with me during the year to evaluate me. That suggests that everyone's opinions are equal. Everyone's opinions are not equal. People who have had closer, more meaningful experience with me are better positioned to more accurately rate me. Or there are some people who say throughout the entire performance management process, the science is clear. People who have goals perform better than people who don't. So there's not a lot of facts behind any of these. You're certainly free to try these things, but do that as an experiment, not believing that it's actually proven to be true. So we've talked about foundations, we've talked about the science. Let's get into the heart of the issue and talk about how do we make this process incredibly easy to use. And there's no beauty in simplicity by itself. There's beauty in the fact that simplicity leads to easier implementation. If we make something easier for someone to do, they're more likely to do it, especially if they might not be inclined to want to do it initially. So let's remember, performance management is not the most entertaining process in the world, and that we might need to help our managers to do this by making it as pain-free as possible. And that's really the core of helping people to understand, or helping people to be willing to implement performance management. We need to prove to them that what we're doing is going to deliver more value than it requires effort from that individual. It's a very simple equation. If you've read my book, One Page Talent Management, you'll see this as one of our core guides early in the process. As long as we're delivering to a manager a tool or a process or a solution that they believe gives more value to them than it requires effort. If it helps them to solve a problem, if it helps them to increase quality, if it helps them to reduce costs, and it does that while adding more value than effort, they're going to be happy to use that tool. If for some reason it adds more effort than value, they're not going to like the tool. Now that might seem radically simple, and it is. We shouldn't overcomplicate this process. If our managers don't believe what we're giving them adds value, they're simply not going to use it. So how do we make sure that things are simple and that managers do use them? Well, let's take a very basic example. We talked earlier about the business objective being our starting point. Let's figure out what the organization is trying to achieve, that hyper clarity. And let's just assume that the business objective here is to align employees' efforts with the needs of the organization. That's a pretty straightforward place to start with performance management. And we know from the science there's lots of great information or facts about how to do that. We know that harder goals produce higher results. We talked about that. We know that you get the same results whether an employee or a manager sets their goals. We discussed that as well. And the science has proven, common sense would tell us as well, but the science has proven that having a few goals is more effective than having many goals. The fewer goals we have, the more attention we focus on each. So if we simply start with that link, we know there's some clear science. That's a fairly direct path to the business objective. The challenge is that in many organizations, we then start to add lots of other things in that aren't proven to add any value. Whether that is individual goal ratings or lots of technology or fancy labels for the goals, there are lots of things that we do that put a wall in between that clear science and what needs to be achieved. So how can you radically simplify performance management? Well, let's start by taking anything out of the process that doesn't add value. So one great example, it's a simple and easy one to fix. You may have in your organization spent a lot of time coming up with creative labels for each of the points on your performance management scale. Instead of saying that someone is rated a 3, you might say they're a star performer. Instead of someone being rated a 4, you might say that they are a valued contributor. But instead of simply saying in a very straightforward way, you have made your goals, you have exceeded your goals, you have not made your goals, we come up with labels because we don't want people to feel bad about being assessed. But those ratings don't add any value. In fact, they get in the way of managers having honest conversations. So for example, let's say Ali is my manager, and he comes to me at the end of the year, and he uses a label. Mark, you were a valued contributor last year. Now, perhaps in our organization, valued contributor ranges from somebody performing at the 25th percentile to someone performing at the 75th percentile. Now, if Ali says, I'm a valued contributor, I'm going to walk away thinking, I'm a 75th percentile performer. Well, what Ali meant was, no, Mark, you're a 25th percentile performer, but he didn't want to have that transparent discussion with me. So that label allowed my manager to not be transparent. There was no value added. So that's a simple example, but you could look through your performance management tool right now, and I'm sure come up with other examples of things that don't clearly add value to the manager. So recognize also that if there's not science to guide what you're doing, it's simply a choice that you need to make. Now, I'm not sure if this has happened in any of your organizations, but I know in a lot of my clients, they spend an inordinate amount of time discussing things like how many points there should be on a performance management process or on that performance management rating scale. And it's very clear from the science. They've done lots of research on the right number of points, and the right answer is it doesn't matter. Managers will abuse any scale you give them in the exact same way. So in the case where you don't have any science to guide you, it's simply a choice. Go to your managing director or another leader and just say, how many points do you want to have on the performance management scale? Because while we each have a personal opinion on that question, there's no science to guide us. And let's also not make things difficult by adding precision that doesn't lead to accuracy. I'm sure that some of you work in organizations that have a lot of engineers or technical staff or scientists, and these people tend to work at very fine tolerances with very small objects oftentimes. I work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies where they're working with molecules, and they don't understand, these individuals who work with those fine tolerances, why we can't measure people in HR at a similarly level or a similarly fine level. And so they come up with these systems where we're going to evaluate you on 5 goals, we're going to weight each of those goals, we're going to put a multiplier and come up with a precise answer for your performance. They want to be able to say, Mark, you were a 4.1259 last year. And it would be wonderful if we actually could evaluate people that accurately. But unfortunately, it's difficult to tell the difference between someone rated as a 3 or a 4. We're certainly not going to be able to accurately judge someone to an accuracy of 4 digits to the right of the decimal point. So when we come up with systems like that where we have lots of formulas and calculations, we add precision. People can say they feel good about getting to that very precise answer, but we certainly aren't adding accuracy into the system. So one way of getting to simplicity is making sure you're not adding anything in that doesn't clearly add value to the manager. You're not spending time agonizing over things that you simply need to make a choice and move forward, and you're not building in activities like goal weighting and rating that add precision but don't add accuracy. Now, a few things to keep in mind. To me, the fundamental starting point of performance management design is this. You need to make the process embarrassingly easy for that average manager to accomplish. Now, by embarrassingly easy, I mean this. If I go to Mohammed and I say, Mohammed, I need you to get performance management done this year. And he says, I'm too busy. I don't have time to do that. And I can say, Mohammed, it takes 20 minutes. We've reduced this so it will take you no more than 20 minutes to get done. I know you're busy, but even you have 20 minutes. So how do we make this so easy that the average leader would be embarrassed not to get it done? We need to, what I say, advise courageously, meaning that if you're in the human resources area or if you're a manager of other leaders who need to set goals, we need to make sure that we're asking them to set big, challenging goals. We're not letting them get away with setting easy goals or not holding their leaders accountable to a very high standard. So we can't roll over and say, yeah, that's a fine goal, or you know your business better than I do. We need to be smart enough and informed enough about the business to be able to say, I understand that you set that metric at this level, but based on what's happening in the business, wouldn't it be better if you set the metric more at this level instead? And we need to build in what I would call consequential accountability. Consequential accountability. Now, that's a longer term that I would normally use. What does that mean? Well, it's interesting. We talk about people being held accountable in performance management. We talk about people being held accountable for developing others. And everyone seems to agree with the fact that, yes, we should hold people accountable for this. But to me, accountability means consequences. Accountability means something good happens to you if you do something. Something not as good happens to you if you don't do something. And it was interesting, in the introduction, Ali mentioned that one of the organizations I run is called the New Talent Management Network, which is a researching organization, absolutely free. You should look it up on the web, newtmn.com. And once a year we'll do a big research project among our members. And last year, one of the questions we asked was, are there positive consequences for managers who develop their teams, and are there negative consequences for managers who don't develop their teams in your organization? So how many managers said there were positive consequences if they developed their teams, or in how many companies are there positive consequences? 30%. Not a great number. In only 3 of 10 companies is there any reinforcement for people who develop their teams. So it's not likely you're going to be encouraged or have any incentive to develop your team. But what about the other side? Are there negative consequences if you don't develop your team as a manager? Do you think that number is higher, or do you think that number is lower? Well, barely 1 out of 10 companies have any negative consequences for managers who don't develop their teams. So if you ever wonder why your managers don't seem to take any action, well, why should they? We haven't made them care. Nothing good will happen to them if they do it. Nothing bad will happen to them if they don't do it. So we need to think through, as leaders, as human resource professionals, how do I build in accountability? How do I make sure that manager understands we're serious about this, and that good things will happen to them if they do this, and not so good things will happen to them if they don't do this. Now, how do we build in accountability? There are some very easy ways to build accountability into performance management. In the goal-setting process, this can be as simple as auditing a selection, not every, but a selection of managers to make sure that their goals have been set properly. Now, this doesn't mean that you're trying to punish them. This should be done in a very helpful way, where either a manager of other managers or the human resource group reads through goals and goes back to managers who haven't written goals that are going to be as helpful as others, and simply gives them some direction. It might be, Ali, you set this goal here, but the metric seems like it isn't really clear. I'm not sure your employee is going to understand how they're going to be measured. How can we improve this metric? So it should be done in a helpful way, but managers should also understand that someone will be looking at these goals. So whether it's their manager or whether it's human resources, someone will look at these goals and will help them to set better goals if the quality of that goal can be improved. So goal setting or auditing is a very simple way to hold people accountable for great goal setting. In most organizations, we say that there should be coaching done in the performance management process. We say that managers should be talking with their employees throughout the year, giving them great coaching for improving their performance, and for many managers, they probably do this and do this very well. But we know that not every manager does this. So one very easy way of holding people accountable for this is what I call the one-question survey. And a one-question survey is exactly that. And many of my clients use this around the world. It's simple. It takes absolutely no time. Sometime during the year, typically the middle of the year, you send an email out to every employee, and it says, has your manager had a coaching conversation with you in the past, let's say, 3 months? There's a checkbox for yes, and there's a checkbox for no. They simply respond to that, and then the data is fed back to managers. And it's not fed back, again, in a way to beat them up, but simply to say, Mark, 8 out of 10 of your direct reports said that you have had a coaching conversation with them. That's great. Make sure that you get to the other 2. Or, Mark, only 2 out of 10 of your people have said you've had a coaching conversation with them. Either they don't understand that those conversations you're having with them are coaching conversations, or you haven't been having them. Either way, we need you to get better at having those coaching conversations. So again, it doesn't take any, very, very little effort on the part of the organization. Simply giving managers some data. And finally, in the review process, how do you create accountability? How do you make sure that managers are not over-rating their team members? Well, make sure that you're having calibration meetings, that at the end of the year, teams sit down together, review the ratings that they plan to give to their direct reports, and make sure that none of those ratings seem out of line given the challenge that individuals had and the results that they've delivered. So accountability is a very important part of driving effective performance management, but it doesn't have to be challenging. It doesn't have to disrupt the organization at all. It can be very simple and very easy. So that, in very fast form, is performance management, focusing on how do you make sure you have the right foundation. We talked about both having hyper clarity, what is your goal, and having a talent philosophy, meaning that you've answered the questions, how do we believe in managing talent in this organization, that your senior team has alignment around that. We talked about the science and ensuring that we are starting with the science, with that hardcore academic knowledge about what is proven to be true, proven not to be true, or proven not to matter what choice we make. And we talked about simplicity. How do we make sure that value-complexity balance is always aligned? That managers look at our practices and say, yes, it's worth my time to engage in doing that. That we're making that process embarrassingly easy for them, and that we're holding them accountable for that process. So I'd love to take some questions now. Just a quick highlight. I mentioned Talent Quarterly magazine. That's our new magazine, about a year old now. World-class thought leaders writing about how do you solve talent issues. And I'd be happy to send a free copy of that to anyone who writes to me at my email, marc@talentstrategygroup.com. Just send me an email saying, please send me a free copy of Talent Quarterly. I guarantee you will love the magazine. Our new edition is on feedback. So very appropriate when we're talking about performance management. We have 9 articles by great thought leaders like Marshall Goldsmith and many, many others. So please send me emails asking for that. You can get lots of other information at my website. So that's my thinking on performance management, and I would love to hear some of your questions and thoughts on it as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We have folks now reached towards the Q&A session, so if you have any questions, you could put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your console. If you click on it, I'll be happy to unmute your microphone, and you can speak to the speaker. Let me go to the first question we have from Brother Metawali Abdul Salam. The question is, they said leaders do the right things. They said leaders do the right things and managers do things right. But in my opinion, leaders and managers should do the right things right. What do you think?
Well, thank you for the question, and I agree with that question. I think we spend a lot of time debating things like what is a manager and what is a leader. I think it would be helpful if we started with the question, what do we need people to do at work to be effective? And if we want to call that leadership, great. If you want to call it management, great. But I think it would be helpful not to even worry about that distinction and instead say, what are the 3 or 4 things that if someone does in our organization, they're going to be incredibly successful at helping us to achieve our goals? And that might be more leadership, it might be more management, but I wouldn't worry about that distinction. So I think you're absolutely right in your definition.
Okay, the brother has a supplementary question also. Could you please let us know management CSF, critical success factors, and KPI, key performance indicators?
I guess the question would relate to what those should be for performance management?
Yes. Could you let us know about the performance management?
And if so, I would suggest there are 3 things, and those are the 3 that I highlighted on that last slide. To me, a critical success factor and a key indicator is you are setting big, challenging goals for your team members. So that has to be the starting point. If you're not setting big, challenging goals, then nothing else that we do in performance management matters. So that to me is the first most important critical success factor. The second piece is that you are coaching during the year, that you are providing people with that regular guidance, honest guidance about how they can perform or behave in a way that's going to help them to achieve their goals. So you set big, challenging goals, you coach during the year, and then you fairly and honestly evaluate at the end of the year. Now that might seem like it's extremely basic, and it is. The challenge is that in many organizations, managers either don't do that and or are not held accountable to do that. So to me, those are the critical success factors, that you're held accountable for setting big challenging goals, that you're coaching on a regular basis, and that you are having fair and honest conversations at the end of that performance period.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a caller who's raised a hand. Let me see. Suzanne Johnson. Suzanne, you've raised your hand. Please introduce yourself and ask a question. Suzanne Johnson, can you hear us? I believe we have an audio problem. Let me go to the question box again from Brother Muhammad Al-Mahmoud. The question is, could you reference research supporting your statement, performance won't change whether employee or managers sets the goals?
Sure. It's actually extremely well done research. What I would suggest is send me an email, and I will send you that research. There's a large body of research around that, so it is kind of very conclusively proven, but it does conflict with what a lot of us believe to be true, that if for some reason a employee sets the goal, they're somehow closer to the business or will be more engaged with that goal. And what the science has found is, one, how we respond to motivation is similar response whether we're told to do something or whether we say that we want to do something ourselves. As long as I'm not fundamentally disinterested in that goal, that performance is going to be the same. Where it becomes even more important, though, for managers to set that goal is ideally the manager should be in the position to better translate organizational objectives from above him to below him. So if my manager is helping me to set that goal, then he or she should have better insights to what actually is needed in the organization. And when I say set goals, that doesn't necessarily mean that the manager is simply saying, Mark, here are the 4 things you need to get done next year. In most organizations, what it means is that the manager leads the goal-setting process. So my manager would come to me and say, Mark, one of my goals is we need to reduce costs by 4% across the business. So you tell me what you're going to do to make sure that we get costs down by 4% across the business. So a manager has told me what the outcome needs to be. I might still have the flexibility to say, here's how I would get goals down or get expenses down by 4% across the business. But what my manager's not doing is coming to me and saying, hey, Mark, what would you like to work on next year? Because that does not help the organization to ensure that goals are aligned throughout the company. So please send me an email. I'll send you all that great research.
Sure. Thank you very much. We have one last question. In your observations, what are the main reasons line managers fail to develop SMART goals and/or KPIs?
I think there's probably 2 reasons. I think the large reason is, as much as we believe we have trained people on how to do this, remember that most managers only set goals once a year. And like anything, if we only did it once a year, that's not much practice. We're probably not going to get very good at something that we only do once a year. So I think part of it is simply that managers aren't skilled at setting a goal. They haven't been taught. I mean, SMART goal, I think, is a bit of an outdated way of even looking at goals. What we talk about in our book is simple goals with the S-I-M capitalized. So simple goals would be specific, important, And I think that's where SMART falls down. Important is actually the key aspect of goal setting. Are these really big, important goals? And then, of course, M, measurable. So to me, simple is a much more effective way of setting goals because you're reinforcing to managers that these need to be the few most important things to focus on. You could have lots of SMART goals, but they aren't necessarily goals that are truly important to achieve. Aligned, which is one of the parts of SMART, is a very weak word. I can have goals that are aligned with the business. That doesn't mean that they are they're written in a way that's truly going to drive business results. So I think one element is that managers need to understand how to write goals that are big, challenging goals that stretch their people. Again, the science would say the more you stretch someone, the higher they're going to perform. The second piece, and we've talked about it a bit already this afternoon, is accountability. If we're not holding managers accountable for setting great goals or for having honest conversations, let's be honest, they're busy people. Why should they? Oftentimes, it's easy to have the good conversations. You know, if Ali is performing well, Ali, that was a great project, that was a great meeting, nice presentation. But if he isn't performing as well, then I might not feel as comfortable saying, you know, you could have done that a little bit better. Let's talk about how to improve it next time. So like an average human being, managers want to avoid difficult conversations. So if we give them the opportunity to avoid those difficult conversations by not holding them accountable, they're going to act like human beings and not hold those conversations. So I think the two things that get in the way are not training managers how to set goals in a way that actually results in big, challenging goals, but also not holding them accountable for really executing performance management.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Marc Effron, for a very interesting presentation. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Sure. First of all, thank you again, Ali, for sponsoring the webinar this morning. It's been great to speak with the folks in the region. And I would just reinforce that performance management is probably the most powerful process that we have the ability to influence as part of a human resource group, and that we really need to focus on those few big things, making sure that you have a strong foundation for it, making sure that you have made it as simple as possible to execute, and that you're holding managers accountable to do the right, scientifically proven things. So thanks very much, and again, please be in touch if you have any questions.
Well, thank you very much once again. I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, Mile, for the very, very valuable and interesting presentation. And folks, thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it, which will be uploaded on Mile Community. It's community.mile.org. Or equally, you could visit webinar.mile.org to stay tuned with the upcoming webinars and access the archive section as well. With that note, I would like to end the webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. Thank you very much.
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.